Welcome, everyone, to the Love, Loss, and Transformation podcast. We are your hosts, Andrea
and Damien. Some would say that to be human is to suffer. And though there is truth in that, we believe that what truly defines us as human is the ability to empathize and to help ease the pain of others.
The Love, Loss, and Transformation podcast strives to help unite through the sharing of people's personal experiences about authentic love, deep loss, and the manner in which those experiences transform them. The major theme of this is expressed in an old Zen story called The Grieving Mother and the Buddha.
It's about a mother who lost a son and is desperately seeking healing. She goes to the Buddha and he asks her to bring him a mustard seed from a household that has never experienced loss. She visits home after home and listens to the stories of loss from every place she goes. She returns to the Buddha without the mustard seed, but is transformed and healed through all the stories she heard that resonated with her own.
As in the story, through our podcast, we hope to create a ripple effect, to offer catharsis while sending the message that no one is truly alone, that there is pain, but that there is also healing and thus hope.
Each series of episodes focuses on one person's story in their own words.
For our first series of episodes, we are featuring an amazing woman named Missy Masterson Hale, who also just so happens to be the inspiration behind the Love, Loss, and Transformation podcast. Through a somewhat extraordinary series of events, which we will discuss in a later episode when we share our own love, loss, and transformation story, we met and were quickly swept away by this woman who epitomizes the term larger than life and has a heart the size of her home state of Texas.
She took us under her wing at a time when we needed it most, introduced us to others as my adopted kids, and very quickly took up residence in our hearts as our Texas mama. When we are with her, we are home.
On our first visit to Missy's home in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, one of the first things we noticed was a large, colorful painting. It is of a tree-lined road leading off into the distance, and sitting against one of the trees is a cutout illustration of a man gazing down the road as if waiting for someone to join him.
When we asked Missy about the painting, she embarked upon a long, heartfelt story that has become the backbone for the Love, Loss, and Transformation podcast.
In this episode, we are privileged to share Missy's story.
We hope that you will be as moved as we were.
You know, within the stars, there's a capacity for order and chaos. They seem to quietly watch us from above until one day they decide to shoot across the sky in a searing blaze of light till there's nothing left. Well, what if the catalyst for our stars is love? It takes us out of that ordinary, mundane existence and makes us truly live. You know, before Tim, I think I was an orderly star, lacking the ability to come to life, but he was the flame that set me alight. And this is a little bit about my story with him. My name is Missy Masterson Hale, and I just go by Missy for obvious reasons. You don't need a big, long moniker to get along in life. You know, one of the things you asked me about was my upbringing in Texas and what kind of a mark it left on me. I got to tell you, Texans, and particularly those from West Texas, they are a really hardy, resilient, and self-reliant bunch. They're vehemently intolerant of rude behavior. That just does not exist out there. But you know, if you want something done, tell a Texan it can't be done. But then just stand back and watch them do it, because they will. They're really unfailingly friendly, which Texas' motto is the friendly state. And they're caring to others, and pretty much will share anything they've got. You know, there's a hero inside of every Texan, I think. And they embody the phrase, where there's a will, there's a way. I'm actually very proud to be a Texan. And one of their best characteristics is they never give up, ever. When I was a little girl, my dad accidentally ran over a horny toad with the lawnmower and amputated one of its legs. Now, if you don't know what horny toads are, you gotta look them up. They look like a little teeny weeny dinosaur left over from a past age. But they're just as sweet as they can be. Anyway, my dad brought this little horny toad to me to see if I could save him. And one of his legs was just shredded. But I kind of cleaned it up, and then I superglued. That was just after superglue had come out. In case you don't know, it hasn't always been with us. But I superglued the end of his little stump with a flap of his shredded flesh. And the little thing lived with me in my bedroom for months while he recovered. Slowly over time, I released him into the backyard, and he lived there for many years. His name was Tripod, but I also called him Bucko for a nickname. And he would come when I called him, which my dad always had me do before the lawnmower came out. And by the way, I didn't just do this surgery without anesthesia. I stole one of my dad's beers and used it to help knock him out. And it worked great. And he actually loved that beer. In fact, he loved it so much that I continued to, quote unquote, treat him with it for the rest of his life. And anytime I called him, I always had beer waiting for him when he came. That was a big memory for me, because it was months of a healing and caring for effort. And as an only child, there was no younger child for me to be a mama to and to take care of. So me and my little horny toad, we spent a lot of time together, and we did a lot of fun things together to try to help him feel good and want to live and want to carry on. It was an important time for me, and he was a lot of company to me. Someone told me one time that I like taking care of people so much because it heals the part of me that needed someone to take care of me a long time ago. And through every iteration of what you might call my careers, I've loved teaching and helping people and connecting with people and animals one-on-one, a true connection to each other and to the collective consciousness and to the universe at the same time. I never feel like I've made a real step forward unless I've really connected with a person. And I guess my Texas upbringing, I have a pledge that I say to myself when I feel like I'm facing insurmountable odds. And I tell myself I will not run from a fight, I will not back down from a foe, but I will also never ignore someone in plight or bring a good person woe. Well, I guess as an only child with only animals for company, I observed and learned so much from them, and my grandmother as well. What they all taught me was that I'm incomplete without love. I can't be right without it. It's the highest calling imaginable. To show love to others, whether they're up on 2 or down on 4, or whether they walk or crawl or slither or fly or swim, it really makes no matter. Nothing ever enhances living more than love. And to me, healing others requires a great deal of love in your heart. Being willing to step out of maybe what's your comfort zone and show love to somebody who's hurting and maybe lashing out because of it, that takes a great reserve of love from down deep inside of you. I guess that's why I have 2 nursing degrees, one for humans and one for animals. I was with a hospice patient who was very near the end. She's a little tiny little old lady, just cute as a bug. And she said, "Nurse, do you know how to sing?" I said, "Well, yes, ma'am, a little bit." And she said, "Well, do you know the song Swing Low, Sweet Chariot?" I said, "Well, yes, I sure do. I sing it in church every other Sunday or so." And she said, "Well, can you sing that to me?" I said, "Well, I'd love to." She said, "Come on over here. Get in this bed with me." So I kind of crawled up in the bed with her and sat with my back against the headboard and then sort of cradled her in front of me and put my arms around her and sang to her. And she got real sleepy and real calm. And at one point she squeezed my hand and she said, "Now don't let go." I said, "Don't worry, I'm not going to let go of your left hand till God has your right hand in his." And she sort of leaned back against me and nuzzled up against me, and I just kept humming in her ear, and that was how she passed. And it was peaceful, and she wasn't afraid. And it made me feel so good and so blessed to be there at that moment, to be able to help her make a peaceful transition. And after I knew she was gone, I looked up and tried to see her because I knew she was hovering there. I could feel her still there. And told her that I wanted her to go on and to find her people that had gone on before her. So I knew they were waiting, and she was such a sweet, special, sparky little lady. They'd all be just thrilled to see her. So that's a day in the life of a hospice nurse, in case you ever wanted to know what that was like. You know, with Tim, I knew what it felt like to be in love, about how he made me feel safe. Like for the first time in my life, I felt totally safe. It was like, I don't know, like coming home, only home was a person, and that person was Tim. I felt the same pull toward him, just a whole lot more, that I feel towards my home here in the village. You know, that same pull you get when you come home from a hard day and you head to your bedroom. Well, that's that warm sensation of safety and being settled. That's what I had with Tim. Only home wasn't a place, it was a person, it was him. In fact, right from the start, something about Tim connected to something deep inside of me. It's as if we were one mind and one soul, and we were thinking similar thoughts and understanding each other because of the life experiences we had both had. There's really no comparison and no substitute for the whole package. And luckily, that's what I had with my Tim. It was the best life I could have ever imagined or hoped for. I remember thinking one night, I wished I could just crawl inside his skin. I wanted to be that close to him. I couldn't wait to wake up each morning and see what the day would bring. I'd lay there in his arms and watch him sleep, just waiting for those beautiful blue eyes to come open and reveal whatever chaos he could think up to wreak on the day before us. I always keep 3 bags packed at all times. One's for overnight, one's for a weekend, and one's for a week. And each one of them has a different colored ribbon on it. So I can be ready to leave on a trip in about 5 minutes. And I'm sure that helped Tim fall in love with me because he was so spontaneous and wanted to be ready to go anywhere, anytime. He was up for it. He used to wake me up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, fairly frequently, and say, "Hey, Princess, you want to go on a barbecue run?" So we live in Arkansas, but we're both originally from Texas, so barbecue sauce is kind of what's flowing through our veins. Anyway, I would say, okay, and I'd get up and put on or grab my robe and some house shoes and take my pillow and go get in the car and just go right back to sleep. Tim knew which bag to get of mine, and he'd have it set up in the back seat, and he'd do the driving. So when we get about an hour away from one of our favorite barbecue joints down in Texas, he'd say, "Okay, sweetheart, wake up. We're about an hour away," and that would give me enough time to get dressed and brush my hair and do that kind of good stuff in the car. And then we'd go one place for rings, that's what they call smoked sausage down there, and another place for fat, that's what they call brisket, and another place for bones, and that's what they'd call ribs. We'd have a wonderful weekend and then drive back home, and I'd be back at work on Monday morning, lickety-split. He was so completely alive and joyful and mischievous and exciting. It was like he was Batman and I was his cross between Catwoman, Robin, and Alfred. I was sort of his partner, his cheerleader, lover, and anything else he wanted or needed me to be, because life with him was never dull, and no matter how quickly our time passed, and I'm telling you, 100 years together would not have been enough. And there was the great darkness that was left behind by his departure, which really felt like it took the sun out of my world. You know, I wouldn't trade a single moment of any of it for anything. There's this wonderful time that we were up on the Buffalo River. We'd gone up to go tubing. It's a beautiful place in northern Arkansas. One of the cleanest lakes in the United States, or rivers rather. And as we're driving along, suddenly we pass this dog sitting on the side of the road. And he's looking real carefully at us. Now, you got to picture this. We were about 14 miles off the paved road at this point on just a gravel, barely more than a path. So what was this dog doing out there? And I yelled at Tim and said, "Tim, stop. Stop. We got to get this dog." And he looked at me and he said, "No, you don't need another dog." I said, "Well, wait just a minute there, big fella. You're not the boss of me." He said, okay, look, let's just compromise. We're on our way to the river to go tubing. We can't take a dog in the tube with us. So how about this? We'll come back this way when we get finished on the river. And if he's still here, we'll pick him up then. Okay, well, for Tim, that was a big deal. Compromise was really not in his vocabulary. But so I agreed. So we went on to the river and had a fun time, and then we came back. And when we got back to the spot where Butter was, the dog that eventually we called Butter, that is, he wasn't there. And Tim said, "See, I told you he probably lives off in the woods in some cabin around here, and he's just gone home." I don't know, something just still didn't feel right about it. But he wasn't there, so there wasn't anything we could do, and we kept on driving home. As got a little further down the road, and we were going up this big hill, and then I saw this dog, and he was coming running over the top of the hill, running toward us. And I screamed at Tim to stop, and he stopped, and I threw the car door open, and I said, "Puppy, puppy, come here, puppy, puppy, puppy." And this dog came running, and he jumped over me in the front passenger seat, through the parting area between our two front seats, and laid down on the back seat. And he was panting, and he looked terrified. And I slammed the door, and we noticed that there were 3 dogs now, other dogs, coming over the top of the hill, and they had been chasing him. So I told Tim, let's go, and we didn't get gone before those dogs got there and started jumping on the car, but Tim didn't let that stop him. He just took off in a rush and a spray of gravel. So we got about 5 miles down the road, and I told Tim to stop so I could look this dog over, and he had a lot of blood on him, and he had a big L-shaped cut on his chest. I said, man, we got to help this dog. But we were so far out in the boonies, it's not like there was a vet anywhere around. And I think I told you I'm a veterinary nurse and also a human nurse. And my husband had about 6 degrees in various types of medicine. So we took him down to the small town where we were staying and stopped at a little bitty store there and picked up a bunch of supplies. And then we went back to the hotel and took him. Now, this dog was covered in fleas and ticks. And his gums were just so pale white. He was so exsanguinated and parasitized. But we sprayed him down with flea and tick spray and then took him for a long walk to give the spray a chance to work. And when we got back, God blessed him, he took that dog and got in the shower with him and washed him off, shampooed him. And I mean, the water in the bottom of the shower just ran red with all the flea dirt that had been on this dog. And we got him all cleaned up, and then we fed him because he was obviously starving to death. He was so thin, and his hair was just coming out in clumps. But we got him fed, and I had given him a couple of beers. Now, I know that probably sounds strange to anybody listening to this, but it really worked to anesthetize this dog. And I had bought some dental floss and just a regular sewing needle and some alcohol, and I soaked the dental floss in the alcohol and then clipped all the hair off around this big wound that he had on his chest and then sewed him back together. And do you know what? I think that dog was so tired and so relieved at not being afraid anymore and felt so good with his belly full. And after those 2 beers, he slept through that entire time of me stitching up that wound of his. Slept the whole night on the bed with us, never even woke up. Well, next morning, I said, well, we have to go try to find some kind of animal control people or whatever. Well, there weren't any. This is such a rural place that we were. But we went to the sheriff, and I kind of told him what had happened. And I said, I'm going to take this dog on home with me, but if somebody's missing him, I don't want to be stealing somebody's dog. And the sheriff just kind of nodded his head, and he said, don't you worry about it, ma'am. You just take that dog on with you, and I'll let you know if I hear from anybody. Of course, we never did hear from anybody. And Tim was so funny. For the dog that he didn't want and I didn't need another dog, he was absolutely bonkers about that dog. Every bite that Tim ate off of his plate, he gave Butter a bite. And Butter was such good company for Tim, especially in those last years when he was so debilitated. That was really comforting to me to know that the 2 of them were together when I left to go to work. Anyway, that's one of my favorite stories with Tim. I think back of all the memories we made together, and I remember one time I was standing in the kitchen cooking his eggs just the way he liked them in a cast iron skillet. And he was sitting in the living room, and he looked up at me and he said, "You know, you're about the worst loser I've ever known." I was so stunned, and I threatened to come over there and whomp him over the head with that skillet. But he held his arms up in front of him. He said, "No, wait a minute, wait, that didn't come out right. I just meant you don't lose people you love well." Well, Tim, you were right, after all. As always you were. Before you died, and this is one of my sweetest memories of Tim. Before Tim died, he used to sit and meditate in front of this huge oil painting I had bought a long time before because I thought it looked like the road to heaven. So one day, Tim was sitting there an extra long time, and I went in there to check on him. And he said, "Come here, sweetie, and sit down." So I went and sat on his lap. He said, "I need to talk to you about something. I've made a decision." And I thought, oh no, now what? Because you just never knew what was going to come out of Tim. And he said, "Babe, I've decided that when I go to heaven, I'm not going in." I looked at him with this stunned look on my face and said, "What are you talking about? That's the stupidest thing I ever heard." And he said, "No." He said, "You know, it's not going to be heaven for me if you're not there. So this pretty little road you see here, this road to heaven, see that second tree over there? Well, I'm just going to sit down under that tree and wait for you. Now, don't hurry up or anything on my account. I want you to live out the rest of your life. Do whatever you're supposed to do. But I'm just going to sit there and wait for you and watch for you till you come. Then we'll go into heaven together, because that's how it's supposed to be." Well, of course, he undid me. Just pretty much like he always did. For a man who had fought against such insurmountable odds most of his life, Tim did everything he could to stay with me for as long as he could. But now that he stood eye to eye with death, he knew this was a battle that he couldn't win just through sheer determination. He wore that masculinity of his like a battered suit of armor, with strength and with pride, and with the promise that he was the master of all things, and certainly the champion of my heart. Tim was very, very well educated, and he was the quintessential genius. I was his backup and support. You know, the straight man to the real showstopper. Every genius has to have somebody like this, somebody that keeps them tethered to reality. For the most part, geniuses don't have much in the way of people skills and really tend not to manage the essential activities of daily living very well. Certainly that was true of Tim. But he was both my touchstone and my kryptonite. He was ever so romantic, and one of the best memories I have of that is one night he wanted to take me down to this fancy hotel in Hot Springs, and they have a huge atrium there. It's a really nice bar, and I said, "Sure, let's go." So we got down there, and he said he'd order our drinks, and I told him I'd be right back. I had to go to the restroom. So when I came walking out of that restroom, I could hear his voice. He was singing that old song called "Some Enchanted Evening," and he was singing it out loud and beautiful in his wonderful baritone voice. in this huge atrium that was cram-packed with other people. And he was standing up singing this song as I was walking toward him. It was one of the most romantic things that's ever happened to me. And, people were looking at him and looking at me and smiling. And I just can't tell you what a thrill that was for me. If you ever get a chance, you need to look at the lyrics for that song, Some Enchanted Evening, because it was magical. For months after Tim died, I could hardly even leave our house. I mostly just stayed in the dark in our bedroom, wrapped up in Tim's robe. When I tried to picture my future during this time, it was literally just this big, amorphous, black abyss. And I also couldn't bear any contact with anyone, not phone calls or texts or emails, and certainly not in-person visits, which is hard because I have a lot of friends and they would come to the house and ring the bell and I would just hide in the bedroom and not answer the door. And they knew I was having a really difficult time coming through all of this. Mostly I just stayed in that dark bedroom with my memories of the 15 years that we had together. In fact, I was a waterfall of memories of Tim, and I just about drowned myself in them. When you love somebody, you trade souls with them. They get a piece of yours, and you get a piece of theirs. And when they die, a piece of you dies with them. And that's why it hurts so bad. But they can still see things through your eyes, and you can take them places and show them the things you wanted them to see. And I think when you do, you will see them and you will feel them there with you. In my grief over Tim's death, those tears would not recede or even give me a moment's respite. I really felt like I was poised on the edge between mortality and something very elemental that held within it the promise of a vast, incomprehensible power. I felt like if I surrendered to the undertow, there'd be no more Missy Masterson. Instead, I'd just become water, which is what Tim had always told me I was anyway, that I could take the shape of anything and be anything he needed at any given time. But I felt like I'd become water. I'd be nowhere and everywhere, and I would be free of my body and free of the pain. There was a time when that was really appealing to me. Grief is so stubborn and wild and uncontrollable, and sometimes you just have to let it run free until it exhausts itself. At one point in my grief journey, I decided I better start keeping a journal. So I did, and it was pretty helpful. Here's one of the entries from it. Oops, big mistake last night. I'm still working on decorating the house for Christmas, but my heart's just not in it. And I guess I thought I'd watch a movie while I was doing it. So I watched The Blind Side, was the one that I chose. I'd seen it before a long time ago and thought I remembered it as being funny and happy, which it was. But as the movie went on, I remembered that I saw it with Tim and how much he loved it. And it really made me physically sick with missing him. Poor choice. Stupid, stupid, stupid. But it did get me to thinking, grief is a prison. And I guess the same is true for fear if you think about it. I don't know for sure, but I'm betting there's a lot of y'all out there that'll agree with me. I had to find a way to break out. See, I'd just been treading water. Oh yeah, I could stay busy as hell, but I was just staying in one place. And I finally realized enough is enough. Tim would not be proud of this weakness and this wallowing. And I did finally realize that I'm not anywhere near ready to give up. I just need to figure out what to do about it. So that was pretty much the day I felt like I turned the corner. That I decided there's got to be something else out there for me. You know, everything in the universe begins with a thought. And I know life has a way of returning to a person just what she has put out into the world. So as Tim and I always said, it's important to find a way to pay rent on the space you take up on the planet. And I was looking for something with some meat in it, a way to put whatever talents I have to good use to benefit others. There were still things that I wanted from life, a purpose. For one, a chance for happiness for another, and definitely freedom from the prison of grief. After that day, I remembered something that Tim once said to me. You know, Missy, we can't always have the life we want. We have to learn to be happy with the one we have. I looked down into those deep, deep voids of the rest of my life without Tim, and it just made me close my eyes with the horror of it. I walked so many days in my memories of his hands in my hair and his lips on mine and the slow, longed-for love that we shared there. In the beginning, you know, when we had all the daring hopes of it before us, I honestly don't know if I'd begun if I'd have guessed the pain at the end. Because I don't forget, and nor does the memory of my husband fade, but as days go by, it does become a little easier. Sometimes in the morning I lie in bed with my eyes closed and let all those small, sweet memories of Tim that I had stored up inside me wash over me. And I hold them there warm and close to my heart. It's not really much of a comfort, but it's all I have. And I've been very lonely. Certainly lonely in the deep place within myself that could only be comforted by Tim. But you know, I have to accept that since he's gone forever, I'm never going to be whole again. But maybe I can be something. Memories are those living things that, dwelling on them, can summon feelings just as powerful as anything else. So much has happened to me since I met Tim and since Tim left my life. I remember all that was, and I conjure up those memories and those emotions. Some days I think that just for a moment, I can make it real if I just wish hard enough. To hear his voice again, one last time, to see his beautiful profile, to touch his big, strong hand, and to smell him and hold him close and tight in a hug, to feel his chest rise and fall under my hands, and to hear his breathing close to me. I realize I always felt a sense of rightness and belonging with him, of the wholesomeness of our togetherness, and I loved belonging to him. He was everything to me, my sun, my moon, my stars, the air I breathe. And I know it sounds trite, but it was real. And his love was so strong and so insistent, and it completely filled my heart. So after he was gone, there just felt like there wasn't anything left. It was all emptiness and aching. Sometimes I felt as though the center of me had shattered, And without him, I was afraid I was like one of those dandelions you just blow off into the wind. There is a dark side to love. That's something you have to realize when you go into it. It's one of great pain and great suffering. But you know, coming out the other side of it, after going through that dark grief journey, I cannot think to avoid the pain by avoiding the love. If those two are necessarily joined, then at least the one can be a balm for the other one. I'll tell you a little story about the practical part of me coming back from this grief journey. And it was my son, whose degree is in psychology. He came to check on me because he knew I wasn't progressing and I wasn't doing very well. And so before he left, he said, "Mom, I just going to ask you one favor." He said, I want you to get up and get dressed every day. And I want you to promise me that you'll do that. And I said, "Mitchell, I don't know if I can." He said, "Yes, you can, and you will. And you're going to make this promise to me because I know if you promise me, you won't let me down." So, okay, I thought, well, surely to Murgatroyd, I can just get up and get dressed every morning. But Mitch was smart in that, my son. He knew that if I wasn't up and dressed and had my hair brushed and all that good jazz, I wouldn't connect with other people. That when people came to the house to try to check on me, I wouldn't even answer the door if I wasn't dressed and ready for the world. I'm old school, and that's how we were raised. Anyway, so I've made him that promise. So after about a week of getting up and getting dressed every day, I thought, okay, I seem to be able to accomplish this. Maybe I can add something to it. So my very favorite thing in the whole wide world, my favorite treat, is a fountain Coke from McDonald's. And there's a McDonald's that's about 24 miles round trip from my house. So I thought, well, you know, maybe I'll just go get me a Coke. Haven't had a fountain Coke in months. So I would get up and get dressed, and I'd get in the car, and I'd get out in the sunshine, and I'd drive over to the McDonald's. Still couldn't get out and go inside, but I could go through the drive-thru at least. And I'd get my Coke, and then I'd come home. And I treated myself that way every day for about a week. And then I decided I could actually listen to my favorite radio station. So one day I was coming back from McDonald's, and I heard this advertisement for a local church's outreach program, and they were having a Christian comedian who had a program he was presenting called Hope and Hilarity. And boy, it hit me like a lightning bolt. I thought, man, if I could ever use something, I could use a little hope and hilarity. So I called up a girlfriend that had been nagging me to let her come over and to go places with her. And so I called her up and said, "Well, would you go with me to that?" And she said, "Sure." And I found out that the way you got tickets was you had to go over to the church and buy them. So I went over to the church. And when I got there, there wasn't anybody in the office. And I thought, well, okay. But I could hear some voices from down the hall. So I went down the hall and found the voices. And there was a man and a woman sitting at a table, kind of like near the door of what appeared to be some kind of a Sunday school classroom. There were a lot of people in the room. And so I stepped up to the table, and the lady made eye contact with me and put her finger to her lips and said, "Shh, I'll be with you in just a moment. Just go over there and sit down and wait. I'll be with you in just a minute." And I said, okay. So I went over and I sat down in the chairs, and I really wasn't paying any attention to what was going in the room. I always have a book on the Kindle app on my phone. I was just reading my book and waiting. And eventually this man that had been sitting by the front door came over to me, and he handed me 3 pages, and he said, "Would you mind reading Mary for me?" And I said, "Well, okay." So I started reading this Mary part. I realized he had handed me some pages from a script. And then he stopped me after I hadn't been going very long, and he said, "Okay, now I'd like you to read Violet." So I'm thinking, wow, what's going on here? But I read the Violet part. And then the man stops me in the middle again, and he says, "So what part were you wanting to read for?" And I said, "Sir, I'm sorry. I have no idea what's going on here. I came to buy some tickets to the comedy show that's coming up." And the lady that was sitting by the front door said, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I thought you were here for auditions. We're going to do the play It's a Wonderful Life here at Christmas time, and we're holding auditions." And I said, "Oh, no, ma'am. No, I just came to get 2 tickets to that comedy show." And the lady said, "Well, come with me right now. We'll go and get you those tickets." So as I started to leave the room, the man came running up to me, and he said, "Oh, no, Missy, you've got to be part of this play. You can have any part you want." And I said, "No, I'm sorry, but I'm not well. I've just lost my husband, and I'm not stable. I'm very emotional, and I can't take on anything that requires a commitment. I sure wouldn't want to let anybody else down, but thank you for thinking of me." So I left, and I went to the office and wrote him a check for the tickets and came home. About an hour after I got home, the phone was ringing, and it was that man. He'd gotten my phone number off my check, and he was again trying to talk me into it, and he said, "I'm really worried about you, and I think this would be really good for you. You'd be in a happy environment with people who will be sweet and caring and concerning with you, and why don't you come and join us?" Again, I told him I just couldn't face it, couldn't do anything like that. So the next morning, after a kind of a rough night's sleep, I woke up, and I've always said the same prayer every morning when I get up. And I've been saying it for at least 20 years, and part of that prayer is, "Dear Lord, I will suit up and show up, and it's up to you to send me where I need to go." And it dawned on me. I mean, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Oh, you did send me where you wanted me to go. You wanted me to be there. So after I laughed at myself for being so blind and got myself sorted out, then I called the man back and said, "Yes, sir, I will. I will come and be part of your play." And that was really the turnaround spot, because it made me get out 3 times a week and interact with other people. And the really, I think, God-planned business of the whole thing, because I think the whole thing was God's plan, every bit of it, was the play was one of my very favorites. It's called It's a Wonderful Life. And it's the story of a man who loses his will to go forward. And then he is taken back through his life and shown all the people that he's helped and all the good that he's done. And I really needed that message. And I believe wholeheartedly that was everything planned by God for this journey of mine to help me try to come back from it. I guess I'd have to say love isn't just the best thing. It's the only thing that makes life worth living, as far as I'm concerned. Love has as many faces as an intricately cut diamond. And what I mean by this is there's a million ways to experience love, both as a giver and as a receiver. I know some only think of love as existing between 2 sweethearts. And certainly romantic love is a great, breathtaking form. But with romantic love, You always have to remember that every love story is a tragedy sooner or later. Not an ending, though certainly death does separate you from the person you love. But it's not an end to love. You still carry on loving them, and they are still there. That's something I learned during this journey through loss, is that they're not gone. They're still, my husband is still in my heart and still in my mind, and he always will be. We just are enduring a temporary separation right now, and he's just on the other side of the veil, or the gate, if you want to look at it that way. I'm standing on this side of the gate, he's on the other. It's very foggy where he is, so I can't see him clearly, except in my mind's eye, of course. So, I think back to the story I told you about the little horny toad that I took care of for many months. I loved that little toad, and I carried him around in a special made pocket I had that I could keep on me a lot of times, and I hunted bugs for him because that's what he ate a lot of. Love is something you do with your hands. It's an action verb. It means you sacrifice and you help and you put your time and your effort and your brain into helping others. When my husband was so sick toward the end, something I did every day was think about the next day and what I could do to put a smile on his face. And that was a million different things, whether it was to get him to reminisce about a time in his life or an event in his life that I knew was very special to him, or whether it was to tell him a joke, or whether it was to wear my clothes inside out just to make him laugh. Anything like that I could think of to do to bring some quality of life to his days. That was what was important to me, and that was where I threw all my effort, all my time, all my energy was into making his last days over the 3 years that we knew he was dying, to making them into good time and quality of life. After all, who wants to live forever if it's miserable? No, but we wanted to make every day count because we knew that it was, the days were growing short for him. So it was a real bittersweet time for us. One time, I had helped him get to the chair out on the back deck, and our house overlooks a lake, and it's in the forest, and I'd helped him get out there because he loved to spend time out there, and I was sitting out there with him, and he started crying, and I rushed over to him and knelt down on the deck next to his chair and put my head in his lap and said, "Honey, why are you crying? What's wrong? What can I do? How can I fix it?" And he said, "Well, I just owe you a big apology." I looked at him just dumbfounded and said, "An apology for what?" And he said, "This is not what I had planned for you. I wanted to take you everywhere and show you things and watch you experience things and see them." And he said, "This wretched body of mine has betrayed me, and I can't do it anymore. And it grieves me, Missy, it really grieves me." And I looked up at him and put my face next to his and kissed him all over his face and said, "Tim Hale, I would rather be here in this exact spot with you, even though I know these days are difficult, than any place in the world with anyone else. This is where I choose to be, and every moment I spend with you is precious to me." And that seemed to sort of be a balm to his heart. And that made me feel good. Love and God, to me, are the same thing. They're two different words for the same thing. Love is the manifestation of God in all of us, in me, in you, and everyone else out there. And it's what I like to call the God spark. We're made to live and love with all the other beings on the planet. And I you may think I'm a fanciful Fruit Loop, but I think trees embody love. I think rocks and plants do. I know animals do, and humans as well. We are all created by God, by love, and are made from God and from love. So there's no separation between us and God, or between us and love, or your higher power, or the universe, or however you connect to that collective consciousness of all of us. Oh, Damien, death is not the end. It's the beginning of the next phase of being. To me, it's not to be feared, but to be curious about, to embrace as the next new adventure. As a hospice nurse, I've been very close to death when it comes, and it's beautiful. It reminds me so much of the caterpillar who becomes the butterfly, you know. The caterpillar thought he was dying, but he was just transforming into another, much more beautiful state of being. And I believe in soulmates, and I believe in magic, and all the rest of that stuff that we're not supposed to ever admit to. In those short, extraordinary years that I shared with Tim, true love was absolutely clear to me. Tim is clear to me. He still is. Tim was me, and I was him. Such a crystalline perspective, and gained at such a price. I guess it's survival's gift to me. I kind of assume it's the gift that I'm going to cling to. I'm going to hold my breath and keep it safe and alive inside me. I'm only going to exhale at the very, very end, when I know I'm going to see him smiling at me once more. And one more time, I'm going to be in his arms.